Now let's see what happens when we have a finite state machine with outputs. So we're still going to have the set of states. So we're going to have an S1, S2, and S0. I'll put them in order. Okay, so S0, S1, S2. What are our inputs on here? The inputs are the first value on the transitions. Okay, so the one before the slash are the inputs. So we see the inputs on these are all 0 and 1. So our set of inputs is 0 and 1. What's our start state? There, we can find it there. It's S0. And what's our accepting state? And notice this one doesn't have an accepting state, and that's fine. There are finite state machines that don't have an accepting state. Notice we've seen them with one accepting state. This is one that doesn't have an accepting state, so it's not identifying any pattern. Here's one that has two accepting states. So all of those are allowed, right? You can have no accepting states, you can have multiple accepting states, you can have one. In this case, we don't have any accepting state, okay? So now our inputs, what happens when we have inputs? We have one additional thing here on this one that we didn't have before, and that is that we have outputs. So for each time that we have an input, we get an output. So let's go ahead and see what we do here. We start at S0, and if we have an input of 0, it's going to move us to S2 and produce an output of 0. So I'm going to record that 0 there. And we transitioned to S2 and recorded the output. Now we're at S2 and we get a 1, right? So that 1 is going to produce an output of 0. So I'm going to write that down, and it's going to transition us to S1. Now we're at S1 and we get a 1 as the input. So there's the transition for a 1 as input, and it has a 1 as output. So I'm going to record that output, and we're going to end up back on S1. Now we get a 0 for input. This is going to move us on this transition, and it's a 0. It's going to produce an output of 1. So I'm going to write down that 1, and we're going to transition to S2. Now we're at S2, and we have a 0. What do we get? Our input is a 0, and we're going to have an output of 0. So I'm going to record that, and we're going to end up back on S2. Now we're at S2, and we get a 1, so we're going to follow this transition line because that's the 1, the first one. It's going to produce an output of 0, so I'm going to record that 0 and follow the transition. I'm going to end up at S1. Now I'm at S1, I get a 0. I'm going to follow this transition where that input is 0. It's going to produce an output of 1. I'm going to record that output of 1. I'm going to end up at S2. So after this series of inputs, where did I end up? At state S2, and what are my outputs? 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 0, 1. Super fun. Finite state machines.